Classified and restricted and formally restricted data are three entirely different things. Well, maybe not entirely, but you get what I'm saying. Classified information and restricted data has been the forefront of the news for the past couple months, as mounting documents continue to show President Biden, former Vice President Mike Pence, and former President Donald Trump all having classified information in their homes. However, we're going to talk a little bit today about what the differences are in those different documents. So, what exactly is classified information? Well, it has three different categories: confidential, secret, and top secret. No, not like a James Bond movie. Top secret as in important documents that no one else can see, except relevant bodies of the government. Classification status is vested to the following, or the only people who can classify something is the president, the vice president, and agency heads, or another word for the president's cabinet. Classified information can have wide-ranging categories for classification status. So, what are the categories of classified information? Well, there's military plans, which is pretty obvious. It's the plans our military is going to employ against an opponent. The reason they wouldn't want this to get out is if our enemies saw it, of course, they could thwart our attacks much more easily. Next, there's weapon systems, which once again needs to be classified because if our enemies were able to get a hold of our weapon system, they could not only plan for our attacks much easier, but they may be able to recreate our weapons. There's also operations and information on foreign governments. Operations is important because we wouldn't want other people stealing our operations in particular, and we wouldn't want people knowing how we do things, how we run military operations, how we organize, where we get our resources. We don't want other countries knowing that. Foreign government info, this is along the lines of we don't want another country to know how much information we have on them. We also don't want them to start requesting how we got that information or how we know it, because then they may tighten up. And in the future, it'll be more difficult to get information. The next one is going to be intelligence activities, which is pretty much the United States taking action to gather intelligence or information that other countries know about us and are trying to employ against us. For example, if we intercept the communication of espionage, this will be considered intelligence activity. Next, there's intelligence sources. This would be people who are working with the United States to get information, whether that be on a terrorist organization or a foreign leader. We don't want people knowing what our sources are for obvious reasons, because they could be killed or they could be taken captive, and then we can no longer extract any sort of resources from them. The next category of classified information that is frequently classified for the United States is cryptology. This is basically the study of codes, making codes, and also figuring out what codes mean. This is important for communication for the United States. For one, through cryptology, we were able to discover the Zimmerman telegram, which was the Germans in World War I collaborating with Mexico to try and invade the United States southern border. That's an example of cryptology. Another example would be the United States usage of cryptic messages during World War II. We use several native languages, and we wouldn't want other countries knowing what those languages are and how to decipher them, because then they would be able to intercept our communications. The next thing is going to be foreign relations. We don't particularly want other countries knowing our allies or all of them, because the more our enemies know about us, the worse it is for us. It's better to keep them guessing. Then lastly, there's going to be foreign activities of the United States, which is pretty obvious why we wouldn't want or our own people or other countries knowing about our foreign activities. There are times when the United States makes mistakes, and we sort of will try and cover them up because we don't want our own people I don't want to say the word overreacting, but doing something that might diametrically change the course of an American objective. In specific, the foreign relations that they are referring to is confidential sources, as we covered earlier, scientific technology. We certainly don't want other countries knowing our technology and re-engineering our scientific technology that we made to give us leverage on either the battlefield or in civil life. And then there's economic matters that have to do with the United States national security. If other countries know where we're weak in our economy, in the modern day where so much of war is about trade and commerce, they could use that to their advantage. There is also transnational terrorism is something that we keep classified, as well as the United States facilities that are vulnerable capabilities. So now that I've covered the different categories, I'm going to talk about how information can get declassified and the expiration dates. So generally, once information is classified, the classification body who prescribed the info will usually come up with an expiration date or a declassification date that they deem by this time it will be secure that this information may be able to go to the public. Now that we've covered classified information, it's time to move on to restricted data. Restricted data is only about information about nuclear weaponry or nuclear energy. It's specifically defined by the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 in relation to the design, manufacture, and use of atomic weapons or special nuclear material in the use of atomic energy. This information can never be automatically declassified, so a president cannot declassify restricted data. It's a much longer process that we're going to go into when we talk about formally restricted data. This information can actually only be declassified or moved to formally restricted data by the Secretary of Energy or the Department of Energy Authority. Okay, so this is what restricted data is about. It's much more specified than classified information is, but there you go, those are the two differences. Now, there are some similarities, and that's that both pieces of information contain information that's of high intrigue or interest to the American people. Both of them are hidden from the public eye to safeguard the United States. We don't particularly want all this information out there. And lastly, they both contain information that is of the utmost importance for national security. I hope you can see the difference and you can understand why they have different categories for the two. But with that being said, I'm sure you're all wondering at this point, what's formally restricted data? Well, formally restricted data is information that has been removed from the restricted data category after the DOE and the Department of Defense have jointly agreed that it relates to military optics that are related to the atomic weapon and nuclear information. So essentially what it's saying is the DOE or the DOD will actually go and they will downgrade some of this restricted information to formally restricted data because the military may actually be able to benefit from this information. So the restricted data, as we're going to get into, is supposed to be seen as by as few people as possible. Very, very few. So if there's a portion of this information that they decide the military needs, they have to transition that information. Obviously, they weigh out the risk and the benefit. So restricted data is information that's been removed from the restricted data category after the DoD and DOE have jointly concluded that such information is pertinent to the military utilization and that it can be sufficiently protected by the national security information in the United States or the national security information body in the United States. Once this information is removed from the restricted data category, it is put in trans-classification status. This means the formally restricted data is still classified. It's just not restricted data anymore. So, formally restricted data and restricted data are fairly similar because formally restricted data used to be restricted data. However, there's much more stringent rules that still apply to formally restricted data. You you or most people in the government still cannot just have access to this, or I should say formally restricted data, whereas classified information is more accessible and also can be declassified by the president. Okay, so now we've covered formally restricted data, and classified information. We've learned that classified information has more categories, 3 in particular: confidential, secret, top secret. Learned that more people can actually make information be classified, such as the president, the vice president, and agency heads. We've also learned that classified information is supposed to have an expiration date, and that there are far more categories in classified information. Whereas we've learned in restricted data, it's specifically defined to information in relation to the design, manufacture, or use of atomic weapons or energy. And then we covered formally restricted data, which is information that is no longer considered restricted, but is still classified and in sort of a transitional state between restricted data and classified information. We discussed why they would take some information off of being restricted data and move it to formally restricted data. And now I will be talking about a timeline I've made for nuclear weaponry in the world. This is important because it ties into why nuclear weapons were so important and why holding onto and safeguarding the information is of the vital importance to the sustainability of the world and to countries like the United States. So in 1938, the discovery of nuclear fission happened, which was when a neutron slams into a larger atom, forcing it to excite and split into 2 smaller atoms, releasing some neutrons and creating a chain reaction that releases a tremendous amount of energy. This is going to be key to the development of a nuclear device. Next, in 1939 to 1941, there was investigations into nuclear weapons, or the starting of research to try and make some sort of task force to develop a nuclear weapon. Subsequently, in 1942, the Manhattan Project begins. And just 3 years later, the atomic bomb goes off in Hiroshima, and then later on in Nagasaki, bringing the war to an end. This is a testament to the power of the nuclear weapon, or atomic bomb. This bomb also gave the United States a tremendous amount of leverage over the Soviet Union, and this terrified Stalin. Knowing that the United States could release a bomb that literally pulverizes an entire city within seconds was terrifying for Stalin, who already saw the Western world and the United States as potential post-war adversaries. However, lucky for Stalin, in 1949, the Soviet Union conducted its first successful weapons test, called First Lightning, and the Soviet Union officially had atomic weaponry. But the question is, how did the Soviet Union get the atomic bomb? The Soviet Union was not exactly known for their cutting-edge research and development. Well, we're going to talk about how they got the atomic bomb and why it's relevant to restricted data and classified information. As we all know, during the Cold War, there was much espionage and ideological differences between communism and capitalism. Skepticism in the United States for communists has not been new. As a matter of fact, you've all probably learned about the Red Scare. And in this case, the threat of American communists was no hoax. Yes, I'm of course talking about the Rosenberg spy ring, an American communist spy ring that gave information to the Soviet Union, eventually leading to them getting the atomic weapon. This spy ring included Klaus Fuchs, who was a German-born theoretical physicist, who eventually moved to Britain and then helped the United States with the Manhattan Project. However, Klaus Fuchs had strong communist leanings and sympathetic views towards the Soviet Union. Klaus Fuchs shared many of the nuclear secrets that he learned working on the Manhattan Project, specifically with the Soviet Union. However, Klaus Fuchs didn't do it all on his own. He had help from Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, as well as Ethel's brother-in-law, David Greenglass. Both Ethel and Julius were both born from Russian-born immigrants to the United States, making their deeds all the more traitorous. But how did Julius Rosenberg and Ethel Rosenberg form such a spy ring? Well, Julius Rosenberg was actually an engineer for the American Army, as well as a devout communist. Rosenberg's brother-in-law, Greenglass, was a machinist for the Army, who was tasked with building the atomic bomb. Greenglass shared the nuclear information with the Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs then took the material and shared it with their courier, straight to the Soviets, and giving them the golden ticket to the most powerful weapon on Earth. However, the Rosenbergs did not get away with it. As a matter of fact, none of them got away with it. Klaus Fuchs was arrested in 1950 via an intercepted telegram the United States received. He didn't go down alone. The courier, Harry Gold, was also implicated in the intercepted material. And soon after, the Rosenbergs and Greenglass were also arrested for the crime of espionage. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. The ring gave the Soviet Union everything they had needed to develop the nuclear weaponry, and subsequently kept the Cold War going for another 40 years, changing the scope of lives for millions across the world, and directly affecting American leverage diplomatically, keeping the Iron Curtain intact. Imagine a world in which the Soviets had never attained the nuclear secrets in the time period they did. There would be no Bay of Pigs, no Eastern German Wall, perhaps no Vietnam War or Afghanistan War, as well as no suffocating Soviet influence throughout the world. I hope you guys found this video helpful and understand why restricted data is important to be kept secret. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Historical site for more content like this.